get this in, a conversation about Jodie's caps.
The question, Jodie, is that all, or are there more?
No, they're just the Chicago team ones. I've got about 20. I've got about 25 caps, I think.
Look at him. We could do a whole show on Jodie's caps, couldn't we? That will be it. We probably should say.
The thing is, people think you wear a cap, like, because when you get a bit older, you start losing your hair. People go, "Oh, he wears a cap because he's losing his hair." I've been wearing caps since I was about 8.
That might be why you've lost your hair.
I know people did say that, but I don't like this finger pointing saying that he only wears a cap because he's losing his hair. I don't like it.
Right, official beginning of the show. Jodie's been wearing caps since he was 8. I'll have you know. We'll put that out now officially. Welcome back, Jodie, by the way.
Hello, great to be back.
Yeah, he's joined us. Very good evening to you. Welcome to Back of the Net on a Monday night. Hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a great weekend, as best as you can. We're kind of getting used to everything now, I think, and we're going to move on tonight. We're not going to talk about whether the league should come back and when it should come back and all those kind of things. We're going to talk about leaders in the dressing room. Want you to get involved across social media. Let us know your thoughts wherever you are. Get involved with the debate. Tonight, it's about leaders in the dressing room. We're going to kick off with managers. I should say a very good evening to Frank and David, who have joined us regularly for the last few weeks, so are now sort of part of the furniture. So let's delve straight in. Who wants to go first? Leaders, the word leader in football. It's been talked about a lot recently in the form of leaders on the pitch and in the dressing room. We don't have a lot anymore. Do we really not have leaders anymore? And why don't we have leaders if that's the case?
No, I think we do. I think what you said there, I think when they talk about leadership now, they probably dilute it down a little bit. I don't know what those reasons are. Hopefully we get to discuss that tonight. But I think they're very much prevalent in the dressing room nowadays. Jodie, would you agree with that?
I just think the perception of what a leader is changing a lot. So when I first started playing sports and eventually coaching the sports, I think everyone thought that the perception of a leader was like big, strong, loud, loads of desire, loads of energy, quite authoritative. But nowadays, I think that just society's changed and people expect a far more sort of interpersonal type leader, someone who tries to understand the individuals a bit more, tries to lift people in different ways rather than just ranting and demanding. So I'm not sure that leaders are gone. I just think we're in a transitional period of what a leader is. Like, I think the Roy Keanes of this world have gone, or certainly are going. And you've got, it's hard to sort of think of one. Perhaps someone a bit more like a Cesc Fabregas. I know he's not playing anymore, but someone who I think he was regarded as a leader, but I think he led in a completely different way.
Jordan Henderson, would you say that he was probably more of the modern leader?
I don't know. I think he's caught between the two. I think he still leads by example and work rate and being tough on the pitch. But at the same time, he seems to relate well to his teammates. So I think he's probably he's the transitional leader. He's a mix of both eras. I think that the modern sort of leaders, maybe someone like Raheem Sterling. You might laugh, but he's becoming a leader, and he leads more by talking about issues and experiences that he's had and tries to help people in that way. And I think that's propelled him into a sort of a leadership position. He doesn't wear a captain's armband, but I think a lot of people look up to him and follow his example.
David, what do you think of when we say leader now in today's world? And you obviously do a lot of journalism with the non-league paper. You get to speak to a lot of players, a lot of captains, a lot of managers. Do you still see that there are leaders in the game?
Think from a journalist point of view, it's similar really to what fans see in the sense that you don't see the behind closed doors bit. As Jodie, it's interesting hearing Jodie speak there about perhaps how it's changing really in a dressing room. I think from what we see, we do still see the sort of the shouting on the pitch, the sort of the clapping of hands, that sort of stereotypical thing that probably does still stand out to fans and journalists, really. It's obviously difficult to sort of give an opinion and not being in a dressing room of a football club, but I think very much it's sort of generally a captain or a leader is someone almost people can see is doing something on the pitch to try and encourage or try and organise in their team, which is a pretty old school and maybe traditional view of things, which is why, like I said, interesting sort of hearing the other side of it from what you don't see. A great point about Raheem Sterling, really, the perhaps his perception that's come through in the media, and like Jody said about him being the sort of modern day leader and perhaps the way he can inspire sort of a younger generation, really. I guess then maybe you're looking at sort of away from the pitch in a sense, but I guess if his performances on the pitch are doing it as well, then it still applies.
David, do you think that as a journalist and in your job, do you think that journalists portray players as leaders or can portray a leader in a certain way? Because obviously there's so much social media outreach nowadays and everything's so well covered that, like you said there, if you've got an England player, for example, that's quite popular, if that player happens to be a captain as well, or that captain's being covered, then surely the media has a huge influence in terms of how we all perceive that person to be. If he's likable, he's John Terry or whoever it might be at the time of his likability. I know he's been under fire a bit as well, but
a bad example.
yeah. But you know what I'm trying to say? We're manipulated by the media, aren't we, in terms of how we see a leader, for example?
Yeah, I think so. I think Jordan Henderson was mentioned there, and you perhaps think back to his time when he took over the captaincy at Liverpool, when obviously Steven Gerrard was moving on, and I think probably people looked at that and thought, how's he going to possibly fill Gerrard's shoes? How's he going to sort of lead in that way? And whilst Henderson, I think, obviously has become better in recent seasons, I think he's a sort of different captain to sort of a Gerrard who's sort of a Mr. Liverpool. I think probably Raheem Sterling's that maybe the best example of maybe the way the media is portrayed a leader in the sense of the things that he's spoken about. Perhaps even the way that the media almost have ganged up on him at times in the past. No, but it is a good point. I think there's still a lot to be said for the way the media can, build people up and portray them, really, and I think that applies in this case.
I was going to follow that with that exact question to Jody. Can the media create a leader? We see a lot written at the moment. You mentioned Raheem Sterling has had a lot of positive press over the last year. Harry Maguire at Manchester United. We don't know how influential he is, but he's built as this massive leader, big leader for England. Can the press, as well as they can bring people down, they can actually build people up to become leaders?
I don't know if they can make someone become a leader. It comes back to whose perception we're looking at it from. Obviously, who fans and the media think is a leader is pretty irrelevant to the dressing room. In the dressing room, it's who is the actual leaders that matters. I'll be honest with you. I've known a lot of players who do all the chest pumping, the clapping the crowd, all the sort of visual leadership, but they're not leaders at all. They're pretty bad examples in the dressing room. They're not particularly professional in the way they live their lives, in the way they train, but they go out on a Saturday and the crowds love them because they kiss the badge, they go and clap them at the whistle, they do a few fist pumps. They're basically cheerleaders almost, and people will perceive them as the leader. In a football environment, the real leaders are the people who set the examples and who demand from people and who aren't too bothered about popularity, because obviously to get more out of people and to question the norms and push people out of their comfort zone, you can't always be popular. You can't always be the one that the fans love, because sometimes you're doing things and saying things that aren't particularly popular, but you're doing them for the right reasons. And obviously, if you're a good leader, in the end, the majority will follow you, whether they like you and like your personality or not. One of the first sort of contradictive leaders, as in contradicting the norm, was when Peter Taylor gave David Beckham the England armband. At the time, Beckham, he was a pop star's boyfriend. He had the hair, the fashion. He'd done what he'd done against Argentina, and wasn't particularly well liked in the country. But from what we hear, obviously I've never worked with David Beckham, but I did work with Peter Taylor and obviously read lots of media. He was the hardest worker in training. He was a great athlete. He was a real professional person, and his drive and competitiveness, as well as skill, pushed and brought the best out in other people. But you never really saw David Beckham as a chest pumper and a shouter and a Roy Keane, Paul Ince type guy. He was a totally different kind of leader, and I think that was one of the first ones of that type that we saw, that you didn't necessarily see all the normal leadership expressions, but he's England captain for a very, very, very long time, and there's been others like him since.
Is that why? So let's take for example yourself and Frank, who have been managers and coaches in their own in different leagues, and you take for example myself and David, who I'm going to clump us in as fans. When we look at a couple of clubs that I follow, Manchester United and Reading, I've put that out there a lot, that they're the teams that I follow and go and watch games and travel up to Manchester and travel to Reading and watch the games. So many times I hear fans say around me, and when I'm listening to the radio stations, we've got no leaders. There's no leaders on that pitch. There's no leaders on that pitch anymore. We don't have anybody that's taking responsibility. United have been for a really bad time, as have Reading. And that's one of the biggest things that fans complain about. Is that because they don't understand that you can be a leader by doing other things rather than shouting and taking the grip of the game? Or is that because nowadays it's very difficult for leaders and on the pitch to come out, because you can't tackle, you don't see players shouting at each other as much anymore? It's a little bit more placid football, if that's fair to say.
Society is more placid, isn't it? Society, you don't shout and scream at people in any industry, and it's acceptable anymore. We're in a society where it's all about tiptoeing around everyone, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying everyone's equal. Everyone has to be looked after. Everyone has to get their human rights, all the time. So that shouting, screaming, threatening, authoritative stuff, it is going to go. It is going to disappear, and gradually there won't be any people like that, because really you're not allowed people like that anymore.
It's an interesting one, Ben, because you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what fans sort of often get drawn to. If you listen to Talk Sport or shows like it, if a team loses, quite often it's even if it's not a tactical appraisal or about the football, very, very often the sort of go-to is leadership, isn't it? If a manager's not doing well, if a team's going through a bad slump, then it's questioning the manager's leadership. Is he capable of leading this team? And that word is quite broadly used, but I think it's misinterpreted or certainly misunderstood. And I think from a fan's perspective, like Jody alluded to earlier, it's very much what you see. And I still go to, obviously not just managing in non-league football, I still go to games. Obviously I'm a Fulham fan, and I've been to Craven Cottage last season a fair few times, and over the years of being a Fulham supporter.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Frank. Yeah,
yeah, I know it's difficult. But over the years as a Fulham fan, I've definitely noticed what's the word? I don't know, deterioration. It's sort of slowed down a little bit in terms of what Jody just said there, that aggressive nature of football and how people are. And at Fulham, it's very intimate, very close, and you can see everything, you can hear everything. Go on.
Sorry to jump in, but using Fulham as an example, when we talk about leadership, Scott Parker was all those things. What we're talking about, the stereotypical leadership qualities. He ran around, he made loads of tackles, he kissed a badge, he chest pumped, he covered loads of ground, and he was quite a good player. And he was probably aggressive and demanding in his nature. So surely he brings those characteristics into management.
Well, you'd think that he would. You'd think that there'd be a likeness to how he played as a manager, but no, it's the opposite to that. And I think what we've talked about today and tonight is that socially things aren't as acceptable now. Football is very much diluted across the board, isn't it? And if you've seen or heard Scott Parker as the example that we're talking about now, when you hear him on I wouldn't say match of the day, Fulham aren't in the Premier League anymore, but if you've ever heard him after a game and you follow him on Twitter or anything, he's very calm, very subdued, very Pep Guardiola-esque, I would say. I'd say Pep Guardiola is a bit of a template for how modern management seems to be going.
He's passionate. He leads through, obviously, his intelligence and his capabilities as a coach, but I think his passion is infectious. You watch that documentary on Man City, the way he talks in the dressing room, not many people can talk like that. Not many people can hold court in that way. That's leadership. I can't see Scott Parker doing that. I've got to be honest. I can't see Scott Parker exuding that level of passion and charisma.
No, but he dresses like Pep. I know we're going a bit off topic, but I'm being honest, Ben. You laugh, but he does. That's a modern style, isn't it? There's a likeness to it, and I'm sure.
We're going back again to replicators, like the chest pumping and the clapping the crowd. It's just replicating what other people have seen. That to be a leader, surely you should be original.
I think just moving it on from Fulham, just wanted to say, obviously, it's terrible circumstances at the moment that we're not continuing. But if we don't continue, at least it saved you the money for a Wembley final and the disappointment of losing, Frank.
Yeah, it did, to be fair, Ben. Yeah, I mean, could have built all of that up and then not had such a good day out. But
yeah. But no, it's a fair point that you make, and I think we've clumped this show really, David, together within managers and players, and probably deserved a show on each of them because they're very different. But we go back to sort of the supporters. I don't know, who do you support there? I never asked you actually. Who do you support?
Woking, well, a bit under the radar.
Yeah. So when you go and watch Woking, do you think it's the same as it used to be as far as you can recognise you've got leaders on the pitch? Because going back to my time watching, let's say, Reading, 10 years ago, I could have named leader here, leader left back, leader central midfield, leader. Everyone was pretty much leaders in the team that won record in the Championship, just saying, Frank, 106 points and finished 8th in the Premier League. Everybody from the left back to Jodie's mate Glenn Little on the right hand side.
I know the left back, Nicky Shorey. Yeah. I know him really well.
Nicky Shorey.
Yeah, but he's one of my best friends. He's quiet as a mouse.
But
he isn't a leader.
But you look around that team. You look around that team. For example, right back then, right back, Glenn Little was on the wing.
Graham
Murty. You had people like Dave Kitson, Sidwell, Harper.
Yeah.
These players were leaders. Harneman in goal. You could have named 5 or 6. I think that was the point to it, that you could have named 5 or 6.
Yeah. Right.
And you maybe could have done a similar thing at Fulham, maybe a similar thing at Woking, David. Probably look around the team.
I think as the guys have said, they're probably fewer of them now on the pitch in terms of the hand clappers and all of that. But I think there is still a place in the game for that from a fan's point of view. At the end of the day, it's an entertainment business. If you go to any football match in England, the things that get cheered the loudest is when someone goes through someone and when the ball gets headed back to the goalkeeper from their own team. And I think ultimately having those sort of people playing the game makes it what it is in a way. There's obviously a distinction between the two. There's the people who on the pitch will be shouting, etc. And then obviously there's what you see behind closed doors, as Frank and Jodie have said, the people who will actually say things at the right time and who will actually influence their teammates really, rather than doing it for the stage show on the day of a game in the public eye.
So
that is a form of leadership, the clapping the crowd and gesticulating, because it's important to create an atmosphere in your ground, and it's important to have a relationship with your fan base. So I don't want anyone to misinterpret and think that I'm saying that that's not leadership. I'm just saying it's the changing face of leadership. That was what we always saw as leadership, whereas nowadays you see people there's a lot more one-to-one leadership skills that are involved, a lot more talking, a lot more empathy, a lot more compassion. That they're skills that you see in leaders now. I mean, I wasn't around in the times I'm talking, but how we stereotyped leaders was very, very different to now.
Well, when we talk about leaders, though, and we're sort of implying that we're talking about captains, and we mentioned people like Keane at the beginning of the show, and we've talked a little bit in non-league of people that have been influential. When you talk about individuals, and Jody mentioned society and its change, we've changed. The whole demeanour of players has changed in today's society. We're a lot quieter. We're a lot. You can't say certain things to certain people. Does that mean that when you look at the great teams of the past, even probably 10 years ago, you would know that there were certain teams, I'm sure we could all name, that would go 3-0 down and you knew they could get back to 3-3 and would come back and win. Great Man United teams. You think of Liverpool teams in the 80s. Not just that. There'll be other examples of teams that would just have something about them when they went 1 or 2 down that they would roll their sleeves up as a team, and they're all big characters. We talk about big characters, big men, people. Do you look around your teams now in the recent years of non-league and think just isn't that the type of player has changed, that isn't the case anymore? We've got weaker characters.
I think that's harsh to say. I think they're different personalities. I think the lower you go down, you're always sort of 10 years behind the Premier League in terms of how things evolve, like your methods, your structures, your processes. I think there are still those stereotypical leaders lower down. I think certainly in non-league, you still see a lot of big, tough guys, experience, play 300, 400, 500 games, lead with their presence, lead with their physicality, lead with their voice. They're still there in non-league. I just don't really see it in the Premier League anymore.
Is that because of money, Jody? Do you think? Because I was having a really similar, not debate, conversation, sort of around what we're saying here, but ironically about basketball with my brother, and we were talking about this Jordan documentary. We were talking about great teams of the past, and I think he'd watched something where what they were saying is there's so much money involved in sport now that aggressiveness that was more prevalent in sports, shall we say 10, 20 years ago, seems to be sort of evaporating because of money, because people get paid so much more now. Their welfare and their well-being is orientates more around how much money they earn. So if would it be a daft question, or would it be daft of us here to pose that we don't see as many Vinnie Joneses, Paul Inces, Roy Keanes nowadays in the Premier League because people are more careful about not getting injured, earning money and that being the sort of the main drive at the minute, if we're talking about Premier League elite level where they are the highest paid players?
Well, the laws of the game have changed, haven't they? So you're not going to see Vinnie Joneses and that anymore, because the laws of the game have changed to protect people. Obviously, people aren't paying to pay their mortgages now, are they? They paid their mortgage with their first signing on fee, so they're not having to worry about things financially. But I really do believe that it is society, and I think football reflects society. I think we have to be more gentle with people. I mean, like school teachers, they're not earning more money, are they? But they approach discipline in a total different way to they did when I was at school. The sort of debate programs on television, they have to approach things differently to 20, 30 years ago. So, and I think football just reflects that. I just think having coached at various levels, I just know that it's really changed acceptable ways of communicating, what's deemed an acceptable way of communicating. And when you work with different players and different managers that have been around in different eras, you can see the change. You can see almost just by talking to them how things have changed. So, for example, like Ben mentions, Glenn Little, he played for me at Grays, was my assistant at Welling, then come back and finished his career playing for me at Haybridge. Now, what he thinks is acceptable as banter and as to say around the dressing room and stuff like that, if he walked into an academy and took an under 18, say took Reading under 18s, he just wouldn't be acceptable, the stuff he says. Now, I'm not saying that he's saying anything that's wrong or bigoted or anything like that. So please don't take it the wrong way. But I just mean the way he would talk to people. Players look at him now, an 18, 19-year-old, and go, you can't talk to me like that. What are you talking to me like that for?
Yeah.
That's how it is. So, and then you go and work with, like I worked with Peter at Dagenham. The way he would speak to players was totally different to what I've been used to, because he was a 67, 68-year-old man who'd been brought up in a much different era. So I think society's changing. And I think...
For the better, Jody? For the better?
I don't think I'm the person to answer that question, as in, I don't think any of us are. How can we say? I didn't work in the 60s and 80s, and at the moment I'm not working anyway. So I don't know whether it's...
But isn't the nice thing about football, sorry, Jody, isn't the nice thing about football, and we'll talk about football, not just say sport, is that it doesn't have it's not defined by an era. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So you take the best bits of what your experiences have seen you through. So if we're old enough to talk about the 80s, the 90s, whatever, and then our parents and their eras, isn't the great thing about football and about sport is that we can dissect it in terms of its eras, and we can say that it's ageless in that sense. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm not trying to be too philosophical, but what I'm saying is we've taken what the stereotype was in terms of leadership, in terms of old school football. You know, you can go further back, Chopper Harris, those types of players. But then if you go to now, you can just dilute everything together and merge it all together, and it's all the same thing. It's just different, taught differently.
Things just evolve, and football evolves, and training methods evolve, and management evolves. For example, probably the best manager, certainly in the United Kingdom ever, Alex Ferguson. Would he survive nowadays? Would he even survive?
Well, look at Mourinho.
Number one, you're not allowed to manage the entire club like he did. No head coaches get that authority now. Transfers, finances, progression through academies. Or he managed from top to bottom. You wouldn't be allowed to do that now. You wouldn't be given the time that he was given. And you know, the infamous stories of, you know, like kicking the boot that hit David Beckham. The way he just got rid of people like Roy Keane and I think maybe Yap Samada. I don't think he would ever have that power anymore. So leadership has changed, and the role of a leader has changed, and it will change again. Who knows? It might even change back.
Do you think Jose Mourinho suffers a little bit with that as well?
I think his sort of short-term demise came from basically from his first taste of failure. He'd always been idolised everywhere, always been successful, always been deemed very charismatic, and then all of a sudden the new era of football, the likes of Eden Hazard, Diego Costa, those boys threw him under the bus and down tools and just didn't respond to his authority anymore, and they saw him off. And I think from that day on, Mourinho had a fallibility. People knew that. There were weaknesses like every human, and that he wouldn't win a league everywhere, and he wouldn't always be successful. And I to be honest, I think, because I've studied Mourinho loads, I think he was very notable in the way that he gave press conferences, in the way he dealt with issues, the way he dealt with media on all levels. I think you could see that his confidence had been dented. He'd become a defensive guy rather than a likeable guy, and you know, players see that as well, and players realise that this he's not the special one, and he's just a human being who they can see off as well, and believe me, players do that. Players Jason was a bit too demanding for them. You know what? They'll get in a little corner. They'll get 5 or 6 together. Then the 5 or 6 becomes 7 or 8, becomes 9 or 10, and they see the manager off. And I think that started to happen to Mourinho in a couple of situations. I don't think it was because he wasn't allowed to be authoritative. I just think it was suddenly not being successful.
Just final word on the special one. Do you think non-league special one is Frank Wilson?
No, actually, it's Hayden Bird.
Is it?
Well, that's what I've heard. Yeah.
Okay, I want to end the show because we could talk about leaders all night, and I'm sure we'll come back to it as well because we were really talking about leaders on the pitch, and we've gone a little bit into managers. Interestingly, I was listening to a BBC podcast across the weekend, and they actually did a podcast on captains and leaders on the pitch, and their number one was it was Roy Keane and John Terry that got a sort of split vote as the 2 best leaders of Premier League era, which is quite interesting. There are quite a few good candidates in there as well. But interestingly, again, the criteria that they were working on was winners. Have they led a team to winning? And there was a big argument whether Wes Morgan was quite high up on the list because he led a team like Leicester to the Premier League title. Interesting. We could debate this all day long. What we're going to finish the show on, though, is my favourite part of the show, which is Who Am I? And today, we always set a theme. We're going to do captains of the Premier League era. So some captains. I've got 4 of them for you. We all know how this game works. Usually how it works is we play until James gets the answer. James isn't here today. Jodie's come in. Jodie, you remember how Who Am I works?
I can work it out, I think.
Yeah. So, but you got let's set the rules here. You by the way, do message us if you get the answer. Put it in the comments. Let us know. But you've got to say your name to answer. You can't just shout out the answer. You've got to say your name and I'll come to you, and then that's how it works. You've got to have a little bit of... We're in the modern era. We're playing a modern quiz game. So we've got to be a bit more diplomatic. It's not like none of this, in the 80s, we just shout out your answer. Okay, so let's start and let's get Who Am I going. Play along wherever you are. This is a really easy game for you to play along with. I'm going to tell you the clubs that a player have played at, their appearances and their goals, and from that you've got to guess who the player is. That's how it works. But today's is captains. You know that, captains in the Premier League era. Okay, so who am I? I was born in 1982. I made my debut in professional football in 2002 at Manchester City. I made 130 appearances and I scored 15 goals.
No. What was it? I was going to say Vincent Kompany. Sorry. I forgot the date.
We'll let you stay in, Frank, but usually you'd be out if you give the wrong answer. So I played for Man City, 130 appearances, 15 goals. In 2007, I went to Newcastle United. I made 81 appearances and scored 7 goals.
Yeah,
Jodie.
Joey Barton.
It is Joey Barton. Yeah, you got it right. That's it. First one tonight was Joey Barton. Went on to play for Queen's Park Rangers. Got sent off a few times, I think, during his career. Played for Burnley, Rangers, and then back at Burnley again. I think something happened at Rangers. I can't remember what, but never a dull moment in his career. Right, the next one you're going to absolutely love. I was born in 1984. I started my career at Sedan in 2002, where I made 3 appearances. I then went on to Hertha to play for Hertha and made 28 appearances and scored 4 goals. From there, I moved to English football in 2007, where I joined Blackburn Rovers and I made 161 appearances and scored 16 goals. I then went to Antchi Makakela.
Oh,
Frank.
Christopher Samba.
It is Christopher Samba, yeah.
Yes.
They went on to play for Queen's Park Rangers, Dinamo Moscow, Panathinaikos, and of course Aston Villa. He was a Premier League captain as well.
Good player.
Yeah, very good player. I think he could have achieved more in the game. Right, let's move on to the next one then. I was born in 1986. I made my first senior appearance in 2003 for Anderlecht, where I made 73 appearances and I scored 5 goals.
Jodie.
Jodie, what is it?
It's Vincent Kompany.
It is Vincent Kompany, yeah. Vincent Kompany went on to play for Hamburger, Manchester City.
Hamburger?
Yeah.
Hamburg or hamburger?
Hamburger. Hamburger.
I bet he's never eaten a hamburger in his life.
Isn't that? I don't know if that's how you pronounce it somewhere else, but Hamburg.
No, I went there, Ben, for
Manchester
the final.
City. Did you?
Fulham got to the Europa League final, and it's pronounced Hamburg.
Manchester City, Anderlecht as well for Vincent Kompany, made 89 appearances for Belgium. Right, I've got one more for you for now. Who's winning? I've lost count.
Jody 2-1.
Oh, it's not about that.
It's nice. It's all about taking
I don't have
part.
winners and losers anymore. It's just first, second, and third.
It's a modern society. There's no, we've forgotten how to win, but that's another conversation for another show. Okay, so I was born. Who am I? I was born in 1980. I started my career in 1999 with Tottenham Hotspur. I made 268 appearances and scored 10 goals, and I retired in 2012.
Oh, Frank.
21
Ledley
appearances
King.
for England.
Oh, Campbell.
Ledley King, that's it. Yeah, it was Ledley King.
Oh.
One-man club, Ledley King.
Yeah.
We don't care that you've got Sol Campbell because we've got Ledley King. I think the song went something like that with a few more swear words from the Tottenham fans.
Ledley King always talked about as arguably it could have been the greatest ever English centre-back.
Yeah, I could have managed England as well.
I've heard that
No,
said.
to be fair, Christopher
You've got to
Sandberg
actually
could have
do
been.
it. You've got to do it. You can't say what you could have done. You've got to go and do it. He was never a patch on John Terry or Rio Ferdinand because he never did it. Never even won a league title.
Yeah, but that's just the problem. The argument is injury prevented him.
Oh, for goodness.
Yeah, but that's a bit of a. I mean, Samba,
John
for
Terry
example,
played with
at one
injection.
point could have been an absolute star.
It's not my opinion. I'm just saying.
So there we go.
You just got to do it. I mean, you don't want to be that man at the pub, sat in the bar saying what you could have been. You've got to go and do it. And Ledley did very well, but he didn't match the very best in the world.
A few different captains there on the list. I tried to make it a little bit varied for you. Do let us know how you got on as well playing. Let us know in the comments if you managed to get all those right. And so the winner was what was it? You got 2-2.
Need a decider.
David, did you? Yeah, actually, let's do a decider. Why not? We're that kind of show. You know, we're in the modern era. We can.
We have to have winners.
We can do a decider. Okay, who should? Let me.
Who's Woking captain?
All right, Frank, you can just fill for a minute. And
I've had some connection issues this end, so I was missing some of those clues.
I thought you might have been. Okay,
You were
right.
just in and out, so yeah.
I got one coming up. Right, this is one. So unfortunately, David, you're out of this. So it's a decider between Frank and Jody. And obviously for those playing along at home as well. Who am I? I was born in 1983. Any takers yet?
Yeah, I've got a fair idea.
I started my career in 2001. I played for Feyenoord. I made 61 appearances and scored 15 goals.
Frank
Yeah.
Van Persie?
Is correct. It's Robin Van Persie.
Let's get in there.
Played for Arsenal, 194 appearances. Obviously played for Manchester United as well, Fenerbahce and Feyenoord. Did I get those? Did I pronounce right, Frank?
I like Frank's tactics. What he does is he just buzzes in and then takes 40 seconds to work out his answer.
But Frank's actually, if you buzz in and get it wrong, you're out, as you found out before. So I think we were playing a couple of weeks ago and James got out, and that was the greatest moment ever because you and Charlotte just went right to the end and you couldn't get Kevin Davies. Took you.
Yeah, James is the creme de la creme at this game, though.
Yeah.
You said, born in 1983. He goes, yeah, I know this one.
David was just. I think David was just officiating, to be honest.
Yeah, just making sure there's nothing untoward going on. Give us some big questions. I don't know anything about the Premier League.
Before we go, David, I will let you have a chance to have a talk and just tell us about the non-league paper because obviously at the moment with no games on, lots of different things going on. What's the main headlines this weekend? What's going on in the world of non-league? And have we got to a decision on the National League yet?
No, not yet. I think the vote ends May 7th for National League clubs to get in their first phase, which is to either end the season now, or if not, somehow finish it. And then the second phase, if they end the vote, if they end the season, the second phase is then to decide how to conclude it. So points per game, null and void, and maybe some sort of other option. Potentially playing the playoffs somehow. I don't know, but yeah, still sorting out to be done with that. But from the paper point of view, yeah, still going. Bit of a slog in recent weeks trying to fill it with no games and stuff, but I think we've had a few good things in there. We had Chris Wilder last week, Stuart Pearce, we've spoken to Les Ferdinand. Some good pieces in there nonetheless, and some interesting things hopefully for people to read about non-league. So that's it's been good, been challenging but good.
Yeah, do go and buy the non-league paper. You can get it online as well. Just before we go, it's a bit provocative, but because we're talking about the vote and the National League, don't really want to get into this because we've kind of run out of time. But surely all the talk at the moment, here's a piece for the paper, David. You can have this one for free. Frank will write it for you. Surely all the talk now is about integrity. We must finish the Premier League and we must finish the Championship. We must finish the National League for integrity of the sport, integrity of football. Where's the integrity when we've had 3 months off and we're going to be playing behind closed doors, which is going to be completely different for the likes of Norwich and Villa and teams in the National League that rely on home fans to create atmosphere? Where is the integrity in that? Where's the integrity of the sport? Surely it's null and void. Start again.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's one of the questions that's been thrown around in this debate, really. Obviously, from a non-league point of view, you look at steps 3 to 7 being cancelled, and people are saying, well, why is it National League following suit as part of the National League system? In my opinion, that's a bit different with the promotion places up into the Football League, but yeah, I mean, I guess you could say, well, they're still part of non-league, so they should follow suit. But yeah, I'm not sure I completely sort of agree with that. In terms of integrity, I think all you can really do is I think consult with clubs, go off what they want, and make sure that things are done in the right way. I think ultimately there's no perfect solution for this unless the world's fixed tomorrow and we get football back tomorrow.
Well, are we, Jody, just quickly, I'll put it to you and Frank, are we, the point was made across the weekend that, if we start behind closed doors, as they've said that we will in the Premier League and the Championship, that it's fair to finish the season. Surely it's not fair to finish the season if you've got... anyone else in?
What is your mid-season continuing, Frank? That's like you've got a factory.
It's dinner time, guys. It's dinner time.
Maybe we just finish it there. I don't know. I was just
finish it there. We've chewed this one to bits.
Ben, I'll quickly say something on it because I haven't said anything. The important thing is that football reflects the rest of society where this is concerned. Can't put themselves above everyone else. So they certainly can't be being given privileges, i.e. going to work before everyone else can, just because it's football. And the longer the gap is between when the season got temporarily terminated to when it restarts, the less likely it can be that it ever restarts again, because we've got to think about the following season. We don't want this to affect football for eternity. So at some point we've got to go, the stoppage has been too long. A bit like when someone gets injured on the field in non-league football and they have to wait for an ambulance to get there. And, there comes a certain point where you've got to say, you can't restart the game. It just wouldn't be fair. The conditions have changed. People have got to warm up again, blah, 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 blah. And that's like the season. At some point you've got to say, well, you've got players getting older. You've got players' fitness has changed. You've got contract situations have changed. Everything's changed. The feeling, the psychology behind everything has changed. So even if you did go on to be successful and win a title or win promotion, it would kind of be tainted anyway, because it's just, people say, oh, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Well, it would be a half marathon and then a little short sprint, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be the actual competition that you started at the start of the season. So I think it's important that it reflects society, and the longer this goes on, the longer the gap is, the less likely it can be that it ever restarts.
Yeah, we wanted to give Jody a view on that because he hasn't been on the show, and I think the point I was just trying to make when we heard a bit of noise there was just for the likes of Aston Villa and Norwich fighting for relegation to try and, their home fans. How important are their home fans? If you're going to play it behind closed doors, that's really, when you talk about integrity and fairness, this is definitely for another show. We'll pass the baton on to Charlotte on Friday night, but when you talk about integrity and fairness, how on earth is it fair that teams don't get their home fans that would rely on that at somewhere like Villa Park? Anyway, we'll park it for now. See the link there. Frank, you're having a really late dinner, by the way. We've all eaten. It's now 10-9 on a Monday night. But listen, thank you so much for joining us, David, Frank, Jody. Great to have you back as well. And the four of us will be back again next Monday for you.
See Frank seething. He's going to go and take it out on the family now. Right, that's it. You're not having dessert. None of you.
Nah.
No, we live in a modern world.
Modern leader, Jody.
It's not Steve McMahon at Wembley. Vinnie Jones on Steve McMahon, is it? We live in a totally different world. Listen, thank you for watching. We're past the baton on now, and we'll be back on Wednesday night, where James will be joined by Ian Dyer, the assistant manager at Woking, for Coach's Corner. Charlotte will be back on Friday with the team as well. We'll be back next Monday. Plenty of content here on Back of the Net. And as always, thank you to the guys, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.